Hello, my name's Miranda. And what happened at my father's will reading? It wasn't a scene from a courtroom drama, it was my life. My sister tore up a $15 million check and set it on fire, while my mother stood by smiling, not at the check, at me. But I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I smiled too. Because what they didn't know was, I held the real deed. They thought they buried me with the lies, the manipulation, the whispers behind closed doors. But they forgot. I was listening. I was watching. I was documenting every betrayal, every forged signature, every backroom deal. What kind of mother smiles as her daughter loses everything? And what happens when the daughter doesn't lose, but rises? Do you want to know what I did next? As I stepped into the reading room of the Kincaid estate, the weight of old wood and older judgment pressed against my skin like damp air. The oak-paneled walls loomed around me, lined with generations of my family's portraits, stern men, bitter women, and all the echoes of privilege I had never been allowed to touch. I wasn't on the official guest list. The butler, a wiry man with silver eyebrows and polished shoes, stopped me with a look that said, "You don't belong here." For a second, I thought he might ask me to leave. But then a junior attorney, barely older than a college intern, stepped in, checking a note clipped to the front of his leather folder. "Miranda Kincaid," he said, not even glancing up at me. "You're on the handwritten addendum from Mr. Kincaid. It was added 3 days before his death." 3 days. He knew he was dying. He knew I'd be shut out. The room quieted as I walked in. I didn't expect a welcome, but I didn't expect that silence either, so sharp it could have sliced bread. Every chair was taken except one. Way in the back, shoved next to a side table where they'd dumped an empty coffee tray and a broken pen. The message was clear. "This is what you get." I took the seat anyway. I sat up straight. Across the room, my sister Isolde lounged like she'd been born there, probably because she had. She crossed her legs, then said loudly to no one in particular, "Some people will show up to collect crumbs off a table they were never invited to." There was laughter from someone in the back. I didn't turn to look. I just reached into my coat pocket, my fingers brushing a sealed envelope I'd carried for months. I hadn't opened it. Not yet. Mom didn't say a word to me. She sat beside Isolde, sipping from a wine glass like it was communion. Vera always knew how to look elegant, even while throwing emotional knives. She didn't even acknowledge my presence, as if doing so would dirty her sweater set. To be fair, I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. Not since the Thanksgiving argument, the one where she told me I should stop pretending to be more important than I am. I remember the way she looked at me that night, like I was a stray cat meowing at her porch door. Now, she looked past me again, to the far window, like I was still meowing. A man in a gray suit stood at the front of the room. He tapped his papers on the table, then cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. We'll begin the reading of Edward Kincaid's last will and testament in 5 minutes." I folded my hands in my lap. My nails were painted but chipped. I'd worn black. Classic, but not flashy. I didn't want to give them a reason to say I was trying too hard. They already thought I was here to beg. "Miranda?" Isolde whispered as she passed me to get more wine. "This must be awkward for you, but I guess old habits die hard, huh?" I said nothing. She leaned closer. "Still chasing things you were never meant to have." That time, I looked her in the eye. I didn't say a word, but I held her gaze until she turned away first. That was new. That shook her, even if just for a moment. The will reading began. It started exactly how I expected. Dad left the estate to Mom, the house, the land, the furniture. Isolde got the car collection and the art in the study. There were donations to a few charities. Some pieces of jewelry were passed to distant relatives, and then the lawyer paused. "There is one sealed note," he said, holding up a small envelope, "written by Mr. Kincaid, and dated 3 days before his passing. It is addressed solely to Miranda." Isolde laughed. Vera didn't even flinch. The lawyer handed it to me directly. His hand brushed mine, and I could tell he didn't pity me. He just looked tired. I opened the note with steady hands. Inside was a personal message. Only one sentence stood out. "There's more than you think. Trust the envelope you already have. I froze. The envelope in my coat. The one I never opened. A few people started murmuring, but I heard Isolde say sharply, "He always had a soft spot for strays. Don't read too much into it." I slid the sealed envelope from my pocket. It had my name in Dad's handwriting, distinctive, sharp, and unmistakable. And then the room erupted, because at that moment the lawyer reached for another document and said, "One final bequest." He pulled out a check, $15 million, made out to me. Silence. For a breath, I felt my throat tighten, my fingers tingled, but I didn't even get a chance to speak. Isolde stood up, walked straight to the front, grabbed the check from the lawyer's hand, and without blinking, without hesitating, she tore it in half, then again, and she didn't stop until she lit the pieces on fire in the candle bowl used for ambiance. The check sizzled, burned. The room gasped. And my mother, she smiled. She sipped her wine and smiled. That smile didn't shake. But I smiled too, because she didn't know what I held in the real envelope. The envelope in my coat pressed softly against my ribs as if it had a heartbeat of its own. I kept one hand resting over it, not protectively, but purposefully. It was my anchor in that room of wolves dressed in pearls and tailored suits. The lawyer shifted slightly and adjusted his glasses. The room was hushed now, tension crawling across the antique rugs like smoke. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking by the fireplace, counting down the seconds before everything changed. "To Miranda," the lawyer read, pausing to look up at me, maybe to gauge whether I was prepared. I met his eyes without flinching, his voice steadied again. "To Miranda, my youngest daughter who always carried her silence like armor, I leave $15 million, and my trust in her judgment." For a moment, it was as if someone had unplugged the room. Complete silence. No one breathed, no one moved. The kind of silence that doesn't feel quiet, it feels like a threat waiting to be spoken aloud. Then came the whispers, subtle at first. "15 million? You've got to be kidding me. She's the one he trusted?" And finally, the boom. "You've got to be kidding me!" Isolde shot up from her seat like she'd been stung. She practically lunged toward the lawyer, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "Let me see that damn check." He hesitated, but handed it to her. She glanced down at the slip of paper, eyes scanning for something, an error, a misprint, anything that would validate her outrage. Her lips curled. "Oh, how poetic," she sneered. "The poor little stray gets thrown a golden bone." And with a flick of her wrist, she tore the check in half. There were gasps, audible gasps. One woman even clutched her pearls. I swear she actually clutched them. Then Isolde turned toward the fireplace, still roaring faintly from earlier that morning. She stepped up to it, opened her clutch, and pulled out a silver lighter, the kind our father used to flick open during long summer nights on the back porch. I recognized it. She lit the torn check, held it for a second, then dropped it into the flames. The fire caught instantly, orange lapping at the edges like it had been waiting. The room went into stunned chaos. "She can't do that. That was legal property. Someone stop her." But no one moved, not even the lawyer, and certainly not Vera. As she stayed in her seat, legs crossed, wine glass gently tilted in her fingers. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just watched the fire with a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth like this was all some kind of performance she had funded. "Let her," Vera finally said, her voice calm as ice. "It was a mistake. He was confused." Isolde turned from the fireplace, brushing invisible ash off her designer coat. "Daddy always did have a flair for dramatics," she said, "even in death." I didn't rise, I didn't shout, I didn't even blink. Instead, I smiled. Not a forced smile, not the kind you give when you're cornered. No, it was slow, patient. The kind of smile that knows things, holds things, waits for the right moment. Let them burn what they see. They didn't know what I held. My hand returned to the envelope in my coat. The real deed, the true one, signed weeks before he died. Not notarized in some law office, but handed to me personally, in the garden behind his beach house. Quietly, intentionally. I remembered his voice then, steady despite the weakness in his hands. You were never meant to fight them with their weapons, Miranda. That's why I gave you something stronger. Trust. And proof. I sat there, flames dancing at the edge of the fireplace, people still murmuring, the lawyer frantically flipping through documents to find a way to recover what had been destroyed. They still didn't realize. The check was never the prize. It was the decoy. The will reading continued, awkwardly, clumsily. Isolde was granted the family's coastal property. No surprise there. A beachfront villa she'd been begging for since she was 22. Vera got stock options, heirloom jewelry, and full rights to Edward Kincaid's art holdings. I got the trust. They scoffed, they snickered, and I let them. Because none of them understood what that word meant coming from my father. Trust wasn't a word he handed out freely. It meant you're the one I counted on. It meant I knew they'd turn on you, and I still chose you. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't touch the envelope again. Not yet. The meeting wrapped up within half an hour. People filtered out slowly, their conversations hushed, eyes darting in my direction but never landing long. I was the outsider still. But now I was the outsider with mystery, maybe even power, and that unsettled them more than anything. As I stood to leave, I met Vera's gaze one last time. She didn't look away this time. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if to say, "What now, little girl?" I didn't answer with words. I let my smile say it for me. Let them burn what they see. I've already secured what they never will. As I stepped out the front door of the estate under the dim lantern light, every echo of my heels on the stone walk felt like affirmation. I was leaving a performance I never auditioned for. The moon peeked through moss-draped oaks, a hush settling over Charleston that carried both sorrow and resolve. I kept my coat wrapped tight, the envelope heavy inside, warmer than it had any right to be. Back in my small apartment, I closed the door quietly, on purpose. The living room smelled like old wood and lavender sachets Vera used last Christmas. I flicked on a lamp and let its soft glow chase shadows from the corners. The envelope in my coat, still sealed, felt like it was pulsing. I set it on the kitchen counter beside a half-empty water glass. I didn't reach for it for a long moment. I just let myself breathe. When I finally opened it, I unfolded a sheet of stationery, graph lines in the paper still crisply visible, and immediately recognized Dad's handwriting. Elegant, slightly slanted to the right, knowing. On the back was an antique key taped in a neat loop. It looked too fragile for what it held. Below in faded ink, "They may claim what's visible, but what's real, you already have." Beneath that, the small inscription, "Safe House Box 108, Luthen Bank, downtown." I sat, the weight of it pressing in, sorrow for how things had come to this, gratitude that Dad trusted me enough to arm me, even in silence. Then I remembered that dinner 2 weeks before he died. I was tired and cold in my sweater. He smiled, more gentle than I'd seen in years. The diner smelled of coffee and salt air. He slid a napkin across to me, saying, "Don't open until they try to erase you." I thought it melodramatic then. I'd had no reason to believe anyone would try. I didn't know what was already being erased. Tears threatened, blurred focus, but I kept them back, quietly, because no one needed to see me break. I thought of every time I sat in rooms where Mom and Isolde talked about me as if I was invisible. Every birthday card they sent to the wrong address. Every dinner where they asked after Isolde's life but pretended not to hear mine. I remembered being 20, working 2 jobs so I could afford college, Dad quietly slipping me a check now and then, but never letting anyone know why. I remembered him saying I had a backbone, that I saw things others ignored. I kept that memory tucked close. When the moon passed the window and clocks ticked past midnight, I finally unpacked a folder of old documents Dad kept in a cedar chest. Real estate deeds, letters, stock transfers. I lined them on the counter in dim light. Mom's signature on one read wrong. A page from a trust agreement had Dad's signature with my name listed. Stock accounts in Texas, real property in North Carolina, things Isolde bragged about owning, but quietly, the deeds were already turned. I realized the envelope wasn't my father's mercy. It was his plan. The next morning, I woke early, sunlight slanting through gauzy curtains. Charleston was calm, gulls calling distance. I dressed in something professional, gray blazer, modest blouse. I packed the envelope, folder, and key into a leather tote. At Luthen Bank, I walked through doors heavy with bronze handles, past security glass and polished floors. The guard asked for my ID. I hesitated briefly at the friction of truth. My name, Miranda Kincaid. He nodded, stamped something. I followed an associate to a private room with a vault door at its end. My heart thudded, not with fear, but recognition. This was my father's final act of trust. I slid the key into the lock of Safehouse Box 108. It clicked. Inside, a thick folder. Property title, Kincaid Estate Legal Transfer plus Proof of Trust, stamped. Also a sealed USB drive marked Confidential. My hands tightened on the folder's edge. I pulled out the first document, my father's signature, screenshots of brokerage accounts, handwritten deeds proving that many of the land parcels one Isolda always claimed were legally reassigned to me, not rumors, not "we'll see later." Legal, binding. Before any drama, any firelight spectacle, my father had secured everything. I looked up at the bank associate. "This was done 2 months ago," I said quietly. He did not gloat, did not tell. He trusted silence more than noise. Walking out of the bank, I felt something shift in my chest. Bitterness tempered by clarity. Loss by rightful ownership. I still had to decide what to do, loudly claim what was mine, or let the truth unsettle them from the shadows. I chose the latter. The secreted deed was never a trophy. It was a tether to justice. I stood on the marble steps of Luthen Bank just as the morning light shifted, pale yellow through wrought iron gates, a signal that something irrevocable was about to happen. The envelope felt rigid in my bag, key tucked inside, deeds folded with care. I adjusted my coat collar, inhaled deeply, and walked through the heavy doors into the lobby, where polished floors echoed my footsteps. The guard behind the desk glanced up when I handed him my ID. My stomach fluttered briefly. Old silences had almost erased me from paperwork, so when he typed my name, I held my breath. The screen flickered. Miranda Kincaid. He spoke my name aloud. Someone still knew I existed. A young associate, suit pressed, badge shining, led me down a hallway to a vault door. Each step was measured, my shoes clicking, heart steady, mind racing. I felt a low-grade anxiety under my skin, not fear, but something like pressure building. The hall smelled of varnished wood and the faint scent of bank polish. The associate stopped in front of a massive steel door. "Box 108, he said, swiping a card. I showed the key. It fit in the lock. I turned it. It clicked. Inside the safe deposit box was a thick manila envelope stamped Property Title, Kincaid Estate Legal Transfer plus Proof of Trust. Next to it, a small USB drive labeled Confidential. I touched the manila, its texture rough against my fingertips. I pulled out the documents carefully. There was the deed, my father's signature crisp, notarized. There were maintenance logs for properties in Savannah and Wilmington, deeds to the farmhouse Mom always claimed belonged to Isolda, stock holdings buried under the Thorn Trust, and bank statements in hidden accounts, the ledger, the trust agreement. All of it. I saw Isolda and Mom in those papers, lies painted in public light, but in truth, Dad had moved in silence. My father had reallocated everything weeks before he died. The check she burned, public theater, prop. I closed my eyes for a moment. Vindication was heavy. Inside the folder was a note in Dad's handwriting. "Let them play with fire. You hold the matches." I exhaled, quiet but full. I realized I wasn't just the heir. They tried to erase me legally, in every ledger, in every contract, and yet, every move they made to suppress me, Dad countered in readiness. He never wanted me to fight in their spotlight. He built a foundation where noise couldn't reach. Leaving the vault room, I walked past the marble columns, past the tellers, past the gold-plated nameplate at the front desk. I felt unshakable. I paused for a second in the sunlight streaming through high windows, Sunlight danced off the polished floors and thought about Mom's cold smile when Isolde held the lighter to the check. I thought about how they had watched me with such confidence that I wouldn't have anything they could burn. Now I had something they couldn't touch. Outside the bank, the air was sharp with autumn chill. I took off my coat and draped it over my arm. My reflection in the glass doors looked different. Not because my face changed, but because shoulders carried themselves differently when unburdened. I called Vera on my phone. Her line went straight to voicemail. Then I picked up my pace, heading toward the estate, our shared home that had always belonged to all of us, but where only some had ever believed it should belong to me. I drove in silence, the key tucked in my tote, the folder wrapped in protective paper. I arrived at sunset. Willow branches swayed in front of the big windows. Inside, the house smelled of dusk and dust, of old rugs and polished wood. The front room was empty of guests now, the chairs arranged as they'd been that morning. I walked across the floorboards that once creaked under Isolde's weight as she posed for parties. I went from room to room, touching surfaces Dad had touched, letting the quiet press against me. The study. I paused there. The desk was the same cherry wood, still scarred from years of pen mistakes. The fireplace Isolde used earlier now sat cold and lifeless. No check, no flames, nothing to distract from what truly mattered. I laid the manila folder on that desk. I sat in Dad's old chair, letting the envelope inside my coat rest against my heart. I spoke, soft so no one would overhear. You thought you could erase me. You thought my silence would bow to your spectacle. But I learned from Dad. I learned that truth is strongest when spoken through proof. Isolde and Vera appeared in the doorway. Isolde's jaw was tight. Vera's face was porcelain calm. No applause, no dramatic confrontation, just tension, thick enough to taste. Isolde's eyes darted to the papers on the desk. Vera looked at me as if seeing me for the first time in years. You. Isolde's voice was low, loaded. What do you think you're doing? I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I said, I'm reclaiming what was always mine. Vera tried to intervene. Miranda, your father, he's gone, I interrupted gently. And he saw this through. Isolde's face flushed with anger and disbelief. You burned a check. I own everything. I held out the deed toward her, letting the late afternoon sun catch its edges. She stepped forward. That's not fair. You're trying to make us look like fools. I squared my shoulders. Truth often makes people feel foolish. They said nothing more. I walked away from the desk, toward the windows where light lay on the floor in patches. I looked back once. Isolde's mouth was open, Vera's eyes glistened. They had no more words. I closed the door behind me. No slam, no flourish, just the soft click of lock catching. I closed the car door behind me, the gravel crunching under my feet, and carried the weight of the deed in my leather tote. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway of the Kincaid estate. Isolde's black SUV was parked there, its tinted windows glinting. The house felt familiar and wrong. I straightened the papers inside my bag. The deed, the evidence, the truth. The property manager, Mr. Dalton, stood at the foyer doorway. His expression flickered. Shock, recognition, then professional reserve. Miss Kincaid, he said, voice low. I showed him the deed. I own this now, I said. No hesitation. No apology required. He nodded. He stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled like polished wood and the echo of laughter from years I never belonged. Isolde appeared in the foyer. She wore a cashmere sweater, pale blue, her favorite shade when Dad still told her she made everything look better. She didn't smile now. Back to claim leftovers? She asked, voice flat, bitter. She gestured broadly at the furniture, the gallery walls decorated with Father's oil paintings, and portraits where I was never led into the frame. You're always late to every family photograph. I held up the deed, letting sunlight catch the gold seal. I'm not here for leftovers. I own the house. Her eyebrows rose, her mouth set in a hard line. What kind of stunt is this? I crossed my arms. No stunt. The real one. Signed. Filed. Hidden. But real. Vera emerged from a side hallway, clutching a shawl over her shoulders. Her eyes held a sadness that didn't reach forgiveness. "This isn't what your father would have thought best," she said, soft voice like a breeze across broken glass. I kept my voice steady. "Then you should have read his signature more closely. I wish I'd had someone who could trust I saw more than the surface." Isolde's face twisted. She stepped forward. "You left. You walked away because you thought you weren't seen. Now you expect respect? You expect us to applaud your return?" "I expect you to respect the law," I answered. "And I expect honesty." The housekeeper appeared, setting down a tea tray. Vera wrapped her hands around the cup too tightly. The china clinked. Isolde leaned against the wall, arms crossed. She, always dramatic, let her eyes roam the foyer like it was her stage. She looked at Dad's portrait above the fireplace. "You think paper gives you power?" she said, voice rising. For the first time that day, I felt rage. Not hollow anger, but cold clarity. I leaned forward, voice soft, but every word clear. "Yes, because this paper is the only thing that proves you burned checks instead of burning bridges. Because this shows I deserve what was always mine." Vera swallowed. "Miranda, you involved me when it suited you," I said. "You used me when you needed funds, praise, public image. But you never truly knew me. You never saw me as anything more than someone to keep quiet." Isolde laughed, but it was hollow, cracked. "You expect a medal? Some tearful moment?" My throat tightened, but I held it back. "No." I stepped closer to the fireplace, looked at the ashes from earlier. "I expect you to realize that a daughter's worth is more than what you show off to others." The wind rattled the windows. A cool breeze slipped through the French doors. I could smell the salt from the nearby sea mixing with something old. Regret, I thought. Vera's voice quivered. "So what now? You own the deeds, the assets. What more do you want?" I folded my arms. Inside my coat, the sealed envelope was still there. My father's promise. I looked at the house, the rooms, once mine, once shared, but always contested. "I want truth," I said. "I want people who believed they could erase me to look at what they did. And I want every lie that built your image, exposed." Isolde's face reddened. "You'll regret this." I did not flinch. "Not if you stop hiding behind fire and facades." Vera's silence was louder than Isolde's threats. I turned away then, walked toward the sliding doors, light filtering through glass panes painted patterns on the wood floor. I paused at the threshold, looked back, saw Isolde standing, stunned, saw Vera clutching her tea. I stepped outside into the dusk, letting the air wash over me. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't need to. Out in the garden, under the oaks, the air smelled of damp earth. The house behind me stood solid as ever, mine now. The evening sky faded to lavender, my chest tight with emotion, but not broken. Tonight, I slept knowing I owned truth not as a weapon, but as justice, and tomorrow I would let others see it. The morning after my house appeared on that blog, tagged, "Fraudulent Heir to a Dying Legacy," I woke to red light blinking on my phone. Emails, texts, social media notifications stacked up like unread bills. I turned off the alarm, sat up in bed, and thought, this is what happens when you step into the light. I dressed slowly, choosing a charcoal blouse and tailored slacks, something that said, "I'm not fragile." In the mirror, I steeled my expression. Vera had done this before. Whisper campaigns, polite rumors, but never so public. Isolde was behind emails, graphics, a montage of half-truths. Someone had photos of Dad signing what looked like transfers. Someone had edited blog posts. I felt anger and sadness, but also clarity. At my former workplace, an investment advisory firm where I spent years building trust, I walked in. People paused mid-conversation as I passed. Some smiled awkwardly, others turned away. Office gossip is louder than the phone rings. A colleague I once mentored hovered by her desk. She avoided eye contact, then cleared her throat. "Miranda, I saw the blog. she said. People are asking, is it true? I nodded. It's not, I said softly. I'll show you proof soon. She nodded, eyes heavy. I walked away before hearing anything else. Lunch came quietly in my kitchen, the only sound my breath and the hum of the refrigerator. I replayed Dad's voicemail again. You don't owe anyone silence anymore. Over and over. It no longer felt like hope. It felt like an order. I resolved. If they wanted to play in the public square, I would bring them to court. I called Sylvia Marsh in the afternoon. Sylvia had once litigated cases of estate fraud. She smelled integrity in numbers. I left a voice message firm but not aggressive. They're twisting things, and I'm preparing to respond. I need you on my side. She returned the call 15 minutes later. Her tone was sharp, professional. You've got documentation? She asked. I listed off what I had. Deed, trust papers, bank statements, video from the vault room. She said, Good. We'll open a libel case and a request for discovery to unearth the false documents. Late in the afternoon, as sunlight leaned amber across the walls, I started gathering folders on my desk. I pulled out the video file from Box 108 camera feed showing me alone unlocking the vault. I previewed emails Dad exchanged with his attorney explaining the title transfer. I looked at the ledger where Dad had noted properties and assets no one mentioned in the will reading. It was coherent. It was damning if someone paid attention. The next day, Sylvia's team filed cease and desist letters to the host of the family blog and the person who posted the defamatory article. They demanded retraction of false claims and full access to the sources of those claims. Meanwhile, our lawyers sent notice to Isolde and Vera. I reserved the right to pursue damages. Public reputation matters. I wasn't seeking vengeance. I was protecting my name, my father's legacy. That evening, I stood on my porch, twilight settling in. The air smelled of salt and pine as cicadas hummed nearby. A light breeze jarred the wind chimes. I thought back to Mom's smile when the check burned. I thought of Isolde's laughter, the way she held the lighter like theater. They believed spectacle would suffice. They believed chaos would bury me. I didn't respond in kind. I wouldn't flirt with drama. I built a shield with documents, truth, solemn resolve. I whispered to myself, let them try to write me out. The ink they burn won't erase what's on my father's books. Sleep came late. I checked an email thread before closing my eyes, one from Sylvia confirming the blog account had been traced to a shell entity tied to Vera's friend, copy of a payment to a graphic designer, a draft of slanderous posts, proof. The kind that holds up. I lay in bed, staring at ceiling beams. Darkened windows kept the streetlights out. Part of me trembled. Was this exposure worth the chaos it would cause? But another part, the part Dad nurtured, steadied me. Tomorrow, the summons would arrive. The court would see evidence. I would stand in daylight, not shadow. I would not be reduced to rumor or spectacle. I would be heard. The morning began not with sunlight or birdsong, but with the distinct vibration of my phone buzzing beside me on the nightstand. The sound echoed in the quiet room like an alarm for something deeper. When I reached for it, the screen glowed with a message I had been expecting, but still wasn't quite ready for. Court documents filed. Summons served. Charleston County Courthouse. 10:00 a.m. For a moment, I sat at the edge of the bed in the stillness, letting the weight of that notification settle into my bones. There was no panic, no surge of adrenaline, just a quiet tightening in my chest, a steady beat in my ears, the hum of inevitability. I dressed deliberately, every movement precise, choosing a navy sheath dress that balanced confidence with restraint, pairing it with low heels that wouldn't falter on marble floors. No bright lipstick, no bold jewelry, just a simple pair of pearl studs and the faintest scent of cedar and tea. Something about that dress said, I belong here, not because I'm trying to prove it, but because I do. I slipped the deed into my leather satchel. The USB drive, cold and slim, went into the inner pocket of my jacket. Evidence, truth. Not fury, not fire, just facts, documented and dated. Sylvia was already waiting in the passenger seat when I pulled up to her building. She climbed in without a word, nodding once. Her presence was steady as always, and I drew quiet strength from it. The drive to the Charleston County Courthouse felt longer than usual, and colder. The clouds hung low, thick with the promise of rain. Golden leaves scattered across the sidewalks, lifted by the wind and dashed against car hoods and building walls. The scent of damp earth, concrete, and coming storm filled the air. By the time we arrived, my stomach was twisting gently, not in fear, but in anticipation. Inside the courthouse, everything seemed carved in seriousness. Polished marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, high ceilings arched like cathedral domes, and thick glass panels reflected anxious faces and polished shoes. Whispers echoed off walls like secrets looking for cracks. And then I saw them, Isolde and Vera, already stationed by the front bench, attorneys at their flanks like soldiers at formation. Isolde turned as we entered, her spine straightening, mouth twitching in something close to a smirk. Vera didn't move much. Her lips were drawn into a thin line, and her hands clutched a handbag as if it held her dignity. Sylvia leaned close to me as we approached the doors to the courtroom. Her voice was low, clear. "They don't expect you to stand tall." I nodded, heart pounding a steady, resolute beat. We stepped inside. The courtroom was quiet. No gallery of curious onlookers, no cameras flashing. Just us, a judge with discerning eyes, two sets of lawyers, and the truth. The doors closed behind us with a thud that sounded like finality. The judge opened the file, glanced over the case summary, and called us forward. Isolde's lawyer went first, his tone rehearsed, his cadence meant for performance. He began to spin a narrative I'd heard before. I was unfit, unstable, financially reckless. He cited debts, delays, moments of struggle. They painted my resilience as recklessness. They turned my survival into spectacle. I didn't blink. I didn't interrupt. Let them speak. When Sylvia stood, the room shifted. She opened her laptop and connected the projector. First, the security footage from Box 108. The screen flickered to life, and the courtroom fell into silence. The video showed me, alone, key in hand, entering the vault, unlocking the safety deposit box. No interference, no intrusion, no theft. Isolde's lawyer leaned forward, brows furrowing. Then Sylvia played the voice memo. The courtroom filled with my father's voice, tired but steady, recorded not long before his passing. "She's my daughter, and she sees what I always saw. Don't let silence be what they feed on." The room stilled. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. My breath caught, just for a moment, but I didn't lower my eyes. Let them hear the lie and the truth together. Then came the USB drive. One by one, Sylvia revealed what they had buried, the revocation of Vera's power of attorney, dated and notarized months before Isolde's public claims to the Thorn Trust, documentation naming me sole trustee, long before Vera's declining health became undeniable, and detailed bank statements showing irregular withdrawals, asset transfers, and signatures so similar they were likely forged or coerced. Everything was time-stamped, cross-referenced. It was all there. A timeline not of drama, but of slow betrayal, of pressure exerted in shadows, of a man growing weaker while those closest to him siphoned influence under the guise of caretaking. Isolde's jaw clenched, her polished facade cracking just slightly. Vera's face drained of color. Their lawyers whispered frantically. The judge turned to me. I stood tall, spine straight, voice steady. "Your Honor," I said, "this is more than money. This is about what kind of truth matters in this country. It's legacy. Not just in name or wealth, but in integrity. This trust was never theirs to inherit. It was mine to protect." The ruling didn't come with fanfare, but it was decisive. All assets under Vera and Isolde were frozen, pending full investigation. We stepped out of the courtroom into a flurry of cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. Vera collapsed onto a marble bench, face buried in her hands, her sobs slicing through the air like broken glass. Isolde didn't cry. She glared, sharp, empty, but she said nothing. Sylvia and I walked past them, step for step, without stopping. No cheers, no fist pumps, no gloating. But inside, something shifted. It was subtle, A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying, suddenly lighter. Sylvia touched my shoulder gently. "Well done," she murmured. The rain began on the drive home. Soft, persistent. A kind of cleansing. The windshield wipers moved in rhythm. I stared at the road ahead, thought of Dad's study, the matches, the fire, the whispered promise he once made. You hold the matches, use them not to destroy, but to protect. Isolde burned a check once. She thought fire meant power, but she misunderstood. Paper burns. Truth does not. Filed evidence, signed documents, voice recordings, those were made to endure storms. For days like this, for the quiet unraveling of lies. At home, the walls smelled faintly of cinnamon and blog notifications. On the mantel, a photo of Mom and Dad sat in its usual frame. I stopped, looked at it for a moment. Neither resentment nor longing filled me, just neutrality. Then I moved on. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and stared out at the rain-slicked street. Streetlights blurred in puddles, reflecting a life no longer built on survival, but on restoration. My phone buzzed with texts, emails, reactions. Some were kind, some cruel. But none of them shook me. Because now they stirred something new, not fear, but resolve. I whispered aloud, just to myself. Some victories don't need applause, just doing what's right. I stood again and crossed to the wide window facing the garden. The oaks outside, towering and ancient, no longer looked like sentinels of judgment. They looked like witnesses. Witnesses to a woman who came back not for revenge, but for truth. Tomorrow, I'll press forward. Not because I want retribution, but because I know who I am. And I am not finished. I still have a name to reclaim, not just my rights, but my story. When I walked away from the courthouse steps, the rain had just begun, droplets splattering against my windshield. I paused in the driver's seat, watching the hood glisten in soft streetlight glow. The sky was a bruise of cloud, dark above Charleston, but inside me, light was settling steady. I drove through quiet streets, the hum of tires on wet pavement grounding me. By the time I pulled up to Sylvia's law office, it was late afternoon, and the sky had cleared, leaving slivers of pale blue. Sylvia ushered me inside. Her office smelled of old books and fresh ink, comfort and discipline. We clasped papers across her desk and leaned in together, reading line by line the documents we'd drafted, the foundation of what my father silently intended. The trust framework, revised public trust, something not just for me, but for the community. I saw his handwriting in margin notes, phrases he once muttered in private. Son of silence, keeper of truth. I felt old patterns unspool, of being left out, diminished, ignored. Later, perched by a window in the law firm's meeting room, I signed the documents that removed Vera and Isolde from all property rights. The legacy clause was part of it. It had been in Dad's notebook, hidden under layers of dust. Any heir contesting the will under false pretense would forfeit everything. False pretense. The words felt sharp, final. I looked at Vera's name on the contract as though I could see her betrayal inked in every letter. That evening I came back to the estate. The halls smelled like dusk and wet wood. My footsteps echoed on boards Isolde once strutted along. She was packing, boxes stacked in the foyer, fragile glass and frames leaning precariously. Vera sat on the stair landing, holding a photo album. She looked empty, raw. I didn't announce myself. I wanted this to be last thing she'd hear from me when she looked back. Truth. "Miranda," Vera said, voice soft as a breeze through dead leaves. "I never meant for you to feel unseen." I folded my arms, voice steady. "You taught me what silence costs. I won't pay that price anymore." Isolde dropped a box. Something clattered. She glared. "You think you're better now? You think this makes you whole?" I stepped closer. "This doesn't make me whole. It makes me free." She snapped. "Free? You're trying to shame us, expose us." I shook my head. "I'm not trying to destroy. I'm trying to live." Moments passed. Vera's lips trembled. I saw tears glinting, but there was no apology, just regret, or maybe expectation of one. I felt compassion, but not reconciliation. Not yet. Before dusk turned fully dark, Isolde made a move. She opened her phone, fingers frantic, to try and post something online. A live announcement claiming fraud, defamation. She pressed post, but before she could send it, a lawyer's text came through to me. We've filed restraining order preventing publication. The kind of legal jolt that doesn't roar, but lands like a stone in water. Isolde's face dropped. Vera rose, arms wrapped around herself. I barely watched them. Instead, I walked through the house, study, hallway, Dad's old desk. In the study, I found a picture of Dad, me as a child on his lap, my first memory of him. I left that photo on the mantel, alone among frames now devoid of my face in many of them. I locked the door gently behind me. Outside, the twilight sky shifted to indigo. The trees outside rustled. I stood for a moment, listening. Without theatrics, without speech, the legacy clause had taken effect. Power shifted under my feet, not by force, but by truth. I turned away from the estate for the final time that day. The road ahead was still long. There would be inquiries, blame, people rewriting memories. But I already walked in daylight. What they tried to destroy became the foundation for something they could never touch. The sky was painted in soft streaks of blue and gold that morning, the kind of gentle light that makes the world feel like it's exhaling. I stood quietly outside the building that now bore a new name, the Kincaid Community Trust Center, but I remembered it as something else. A home, a battleground, a place that once shut its doors in my face and locked the truth inside marble walls. It had been nearly 6 months since the court handed down its decision, since I stood in front of a room full of people who had decided what parts of me were acceptable, which versions of me were true, and now, here I was again. But this time, it was on my terms. I wore a navy blazer over a muted gray dress, modest and clean. My shoes sank slightly into the lawn, still damp from the morning dew. The landscaping had been refreshed, neatly trimmed hedges, flower beds replanted, paint touched up. It smelled like new beginnings. A crowd had gathered on the front lawn. Neighbors, former staff who used to work behind these walls, people my father had once mentored or helped quietly through scholarships or job offers. They came not just for the dedication ceremony, but because they knew something sacred was being returned. Not wealth, but truth. This wasn't just a building, it was a reclamation. I approached the podium, fingers tightening slightly on the microphone. My voice, though calm, carried weight from the first word. This house tried to erase me, I said, and paused. My throat tightened, but I held steady. Now it will raise others. There was a beat of silence, a hush of recognition, then gentle applause. Not explosive, not performative, just real. Behind me, the newly polished sign gleamed in the morning light, Kincaid Community Trust Center. Beneath it, in bronze, a plaque with my father's name etched into it. In memory of Harold Kincaid, builder, believer, father. May his legacy serve the many, not the few. After the speeches, I stepped away. I didn't need to be the center of attention. I found a bench tucked beneath the old oak tree, one Dad had planted before I was born. Its roots were deep now, the bark thick with age and memory. I sat quietly, letting the breeze rustle through the leaves overhead. I closed my eyes and was immediately transported back. Isolde, standing in that same yard, holding a lighter to the check my father wrote me in secret. Mom smiling tightly beside her. Their betrayal didn't come with screaming. It came with applause from the wrong people and the silent nods of those who knew better but chose convenience. The courtroom tension, the headlines branding me a fraud before the facts had time to breathe, the humiliation, the doubt, the weight of proving your own existence when everyone around you is rewriting the narrative. But they weren't the whole story. Not anymore. A few weeks earlier, my therapist said something that echoed louder than I expected. She leaned forward and said, "Justice and healing don't arrive together. One opens the door, the other walks in slowly." At the time, I nodded politely, unsure whether the words would linger, but they had. Because justice, however it looks, may grant you the deed, the ruling, the recognition. But healing? Healing is slow, uneven, sometimes silent. It sneaks in through quiet mornings and conversations you didn't know you needed. Healing sits beside you on park benches while you wonder if you're still angry. It walks with you through buildings you once fled. My phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced at the screen. It was an email, a scanned letter from rehab, from Isolde. I hesitated before opening it. My fingers trembled slightly as I read. She spoke of guilt, of spiraling, of the weight she carried that turned into cruelty. I didn't mean for it to go this far. She wrote of our childhood, of the pressure, the comparison. She asked, gently, almost like a whisper, if there could be forgiveness someday. Tears welled in my eyes, not from anger, but from the ache of complicated love. I didn't respond. Not yet. I folded the letter and slipped it into my bag. Some wounds don't heal because you pick at them. Some heal because you leave them be. Vera, my mother, now lived in a private senior care facility. I visited once. Her eyes had lost some of their sharpness, but her pride remained intact, her emotional fortress. She refused all visitors, even Isolde. Her world had grown quiet, dignified, but lonely. When I sat across from her that day, I saw a flicker of recognition. She didn't apologize, she didn't explain, but her silence said more than her words ever did. She stared out the window while I spoke. I said goodbye, softly, and left. I didn't need anything from her anymore. Later that afternoon, I walked through the old house again, now renovated as a community center. Children would one day run down these halls. There were classrooms where the guest bedrooms used to be, counseling offices where the sunroom once stood, art therapy spaces, financial literacy workshops, free childcare rooms. The home had been reimagined, and finally, it had a purpose bigger than legacy. It had impact. I wandered into Dad's study, untouched in layout but freshened. His desk stood there, oak, polished. I opened the middle drawer and found what I had long forgotten. A photo of me as a child, sitting in his lap, smiling like I belonged. I smiled at the image. I placed it on the mantel where everyone would see it. I left the rest of the portraits on the walls, ones of family members who had tried to erase me, but this photo stayed, not as revenge, but as reclamation. Before I left, I turned the key in the front door. The lock clicked gently. I didn't look back. Weeks later, the foundation I started, the Heiress Initiative, announced its first round of grant recipients. 6 families, all women, each with a different version of my story. Stolen inheritance, buried truth, betrayal from within. At the ceremony, one young woman stood at the microphone. She clutched the edge of the podium, voice shaking. She looked maybe 19. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me," she said. "You made me believe again." Her words landed deep, like the sunrise after a sleepless night. These days, I wake up to different thoughts, not courtroom transcripts, not headlines, not betrayal. I wake up wondering what classes are happening today at the Trust Center, whether the single mother from last week found housing, whether that kid in art therapy is still painting birds with blue feathers. I breathe in peace where once there was panic. I remember what my father whispered the night he handed me the key, all those years ago, in secret. "You hold the matches now, Heiress." He didn't mean to burn it all down. He meant something gentler, more enduring, to illuminate, to rebuild, to protect. And I did, because they tried to write me out of the story. But I picked up the pen, and I wrote the truth instead. Sometimes the ones closest to us cause the deepest wounds, not with fists, but with silence, manipulation, and betrayal disguised as love. But the lesson here isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice when others try to write your story for you. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Or silenced when you knew the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters.